Well, much like Paul himself, we are back talking about Ephesus. In our previous video about the city, we discussed the political and geographical climate surrounding Ephesus to better understand Paul's first epistle to Timothy. But we kind of ran out of time before talking about a huge aspect of the Ephesian city that informs not only the second letter to Timothy, but also the letter to the Ephesians and their shout out, albeit for the worse, in Revelation 2. So, what did religion look like in Ephesus? And why did it require such extensive teaching and one of Paul's right-hand guys staying in the city to fix the problem? Ephesus was the home of the temple to the Ephesian Artemis, which is dedicated to the eponymous goddess of nature. If you can hurt your brain enough to remember 2 weeks ago, you'll recall that Ephesus had a large gymnasium, which doubled as a school. Worship of Artemis was different to many other gods, like the Roman Diana, which involved cultic prostitution. Instead, Artemis' worship was more so done through reason and stone-cold philosophy. We sort of have a chicken and the egg situation here, as we're not totally sure whether the culture of Ephesus influenced the worship of Artemis or if the worship changed the culture to more suit it. It's also entirely possible that the two grew alongside one another. We just don't really know. Irregardless, many deities at the time possessed shrine prostitution, whereas Artemis was valued as a goddess of chastity. This gives us a great insight into the way that the Ephesians thought. They were a very logos-based people, preferring hard logic and reason to emotional displays. So when Christ tells the Ephesian church, quote, "But I have this against you. You have abandoned the love you had at first," in Revelation 2, we can understand that this is likely because the culture around them put such little value on love. Paul's instruction to Philemon was not to welcome Onesimus back as a slave, but instead as a brother. And the way that Paul says it is very much an appeal to the problem that plagued Ephesians in Revelation 2. Paul says in Philemon 8 and 9, "Therefore, although in Christ, I could be bold and order you to do what you ought to do, yet I prefer to appeal to you on the basis of love." Paul says that he could just order Philemon to do what is right on the basis of his adherence to Christ, which would be the logical appeal. But rather, he goes with the argument from love to further enforce the problem area of the Ephesians. We can also see this in the letter to the Ephesians, as Ephesians 4 through 6 is a repudiation of the lesser focus on loving relationships, and it acts as an appeal to the world the Ephesians lived in. The armor of God is a description of a Roman soldier's outfit, which is something that, yes, the Jews would be familiar with, but the Greeks would arguably even be more familiar, since their armor was far more similar to the Romans. Speaking of the Jews, we mentioned last time how there was a much heavier population of Jews in Ephesus than there were in the other areas, and by the end of the 1st century, Judaism was among one of the highest practiced religions in the city. A likely reason for this would be the exile of the Jews from Rome, which happened under Claudius, as Luke mentions in Acts 18:2, and is confirmed extra-biblically by the secular historian Suetonius. Claudius ordered the Jews out of Rome, which caused a mass exodus into the surrounding areas, and a return for many to Jerusalem. And as we previously discussed, Ephesus is smack dab in the middle of the journey from Jerusalem to Rome. It is not only possible, but very likely, that exiled Jews would have fled to Ephesus en route to Jerusalem, but established themselves in the Greek city instead. This was not uncommon, as Priscilla and Aquila's stay in Corinth proves. So now when we turn to the Epistle of Ephesians, we can understand why Paul uses terms like election and Messiah in various places. Were Paul only writing to the Greeks, then calling Christ the Messiah would be, frankly, meaningless to them, as they had no concept of the Jewish anointed one. But his inclusion of the term is a clear indication that not only is he writing to non-Jews, but there is a focus on the Jewish audience too. All of this comes to a culmination in Paul's second letter to Timothy. In the first chapter, Paul encourages Timothy to hold fast to the gospel, not through reason, but through the grace of God. Remember the charge in Revelation 2. Ephesus was not lacking for intellect, they were lacking for love. Paul instructs Timothy to first consider the grace of the gospel before then launching into the advice against certain types of people. But before we talk about that, notice again the specific language used throughout the book. He talks about the elect, talks about David, and he talks about Moses. Paul knows the audience he is writing about, which is primarily Jewish. He even mentions a few Jewish followers at the end of the book by name, being Priscilla and Aquila, whom we previously talked about. On the subject of Jewish people, we have been covering and debating them extensively on this channel throughout the month, and Paul apparently speaks directly to us when he says not to have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments. In reality, Paul is talking about the philosophies swirling around Ephesus of pure logical reasoning with no emotional weight or thought to how human beings actually operate. No, appeals to emotion do not make an argument correct. However, an argument can be made incorrect by ignoring the reality of human nature. These arguments were very common given the educational focus of Ephesus, and Paul advises Timothy against wasting his time with them. He also tells Timothy not to have business with the people who practice these ideas, as they have no love for humanity in them. Instead, they have become lovers of material things, which is the opposite of the gospel. Paul encourages his pupil to root himself in the scriptures, as they are the guiding light of truth. The writings to the Ephesian church are also exactly this, scriptures which are the guiding light to truth. While the writings were written to specific people in a specific culture, we can look around and realize that not much has changed. People still worship everything that is not God in an effort to gain for themselves what God would readily provide: faith, hope, and love. We should adhere strongly to the scriptures, as they are God-breathed, useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that you, servant of God, may be thoroughly equipped for every good